and everyone. I think every single panel and speaker has had so much insight to add to this ongoing struggle against this growing behemoth. And we are going to talk about this behemoth's impact on the climate, which is growing by the day. So Amazon, I'll just start with a little bit of context. I'm a tech reporter and I've covered Amazon for 10 years now. And Amazon is kind of unique among its tech peers in that it's never really particularly evinced much of an interest or concern in being proactive about climate issues. Where Google and Facebook sort of boldly announced these targets to be 100% powered by renewable energy, sort of Amazon has always been a laggard. Jeff Bezos himself put it recently that they were content to remain in the middle of the herd. And all this sort of slow adoption of clean energy sort of came at a time when AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is really the only seriously profitable component of Amazon's business portfolio, was coming to host a huge percentage of the web pages that make up the internet as we know it. And it never really wanted to disclose its carbon footprint, and in fact only did so a few months ago after some intense and really good organizing by Amazon employees, which we'll talk about here in a second. And when it finally did, it said that it emitted probably about 4.4 million metric tons, I believe, an amount that's almost in line with what Denmark or Switzerland emits total as a nation. So it's emitting, as much carbon as a advanced nation state, and that is probably an underestimate because Amazon has also gotten into the business of selling automation, AI, and big data tools to accelerate and enhance the extraction rates of oil companies, which is one of its sort of newer ventures over the last 3 years. All the major tech companies are doing this now. Amazon, which again runs AWS, which underwrites a huge part of the web, is in one of the best positions to sell these tools to the oil companies. And as a result, we have seen Amazon's sort of carbon footprint balloon, and it's only continuing to balloon. Bezos recently announced this climate pledge, again, as a response to this dedicated organizing by the employees. But it's also full of holes, and just days after this climate pledge was announced, he sent one of his top executives to an Accelerate Oil Production 4.0 conference, sort of showing that Amazon's is still dedicated to its portfolio of oil clients, more than perhaps a wider sustainability goal target. So today we have actually two former Amazon employees who have sort of a very unique and almost unprecedented insight into how these work. Eliza was with Amazon Climate Justice. Am I cutting out here? Okay. And Paul Johnson over here was with AWS in the UK. So first, let's go to you, Paul, and you can tell us a little bit about how AWS works, what the attitude towards sort of climate policy is, and sort of where we stand today.
That's a massive question.
You have 2 minutes.
Oh, good. So a little bit of background. I've been in tech for 20 years, and when you work in tech and when you follow the way that tech moves is you keep following the trends. You just follow the trends. You keep up with what's going on, and tech moves at an incredible pace. And one of the biggest trend changes is cloud. And so, over 10 years ago now, this thing emerged, and it emerged out of Amazon. Amazon Web Services turns up, and everyone starts talking about this thing that we've all got to start using because it's so innovative and so new, and it means that we can do things so much more quickly, so much more easily in tech. We don't have to go to a data center and hire servers and get servers, we can just use a website or use a bit of small little program to get all the infrastructure that we need to run complex websites and services. And it's just that ability to do something so quickly and easily that AWS allows you to do, and that efficiency gain and that value is what AWS is. And while we've talked to that, we've listened to a lot of conversations around the warehouses, and we've talked about all of those other things. AWS is, as has been mentioned, it's the profitable bit, and the reason it's profitable is simply because there are companies and huge numbers of companies out there who are using AWS because of the efficiency gains they get by not having to do anything with their own data centers. They're just like, yep, I can do all of these clever things with technology just by clicking my fingers and it's there. And so it's not just oil and gas companies who are using AI and machine learning. There are these, Netflix, for example, runs pretty much everything on AWS. So when you're watching Netflix, you're using Amazon. This isn't just another company who's decided to. They are completely using Amazon. Everything is streamed from there. So you've got, and that's just one example. I could pick many. And when you're talking about workers, something that's been mentioned a little bit as well. The workers are, worked very hard, and it's an incredibly difficult culture to be a part of. It's relentless. It's there are something we'll go into a little bit, I think. But I think we're not just talking about the works and fulfillment centres, but the culture actually is right up the chain. It's not just the lower end. It's everyone has the same thing. I had a message from a friend of mine literally this morning saying Amazon is a cult. Now that's his words, and I'm his way of saying this, and I understand what he means by it. There is a way of doing things. There's mantras around how you should be customer obsessed, and that's one of the things that you say when you're in AWS. If a customer asks you to do something, you should be customer obsessed about the way you should do it. And so when it comes to things like climate change, if the customers aren't talking about it, we're not interested. And so that's, this is bringing it all back. If we're not interested in climate change, then we won't do anything about it.
To that point, isn't it, it sort of provides a convenient cut for someone like Netflix, to use your example, whose climate impact would mostly come from their server usage. This is kind of a convenient way for them to sort of pass the buck too, isn't it?
It's a very convenient way for them to pass the buck. So actually the person who oversaw the majority of their tech expansion now works at AWS. And he did a talk very recently. I was at the same conference where he put up a slide saying none of our customers are talking to us about climate change, and unless our customers are talking to us about it, we can't do anything about it. And so literally handing the responsibility over to customers. And so we're all sitting there in the audience going, well, we are, the tech industry is your customers. So what you're actually saying is until the tech industry tells you that we want you to do something, you're not going to do anything. They're literally abdicating the responsibility.
Right. And to the extent that there has been a discussion about climate issues in the tech industry, a lot of that is thanks to sort of the organizing and the work that's been going on at the Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, which you have been an integral part of. Eliza, can you introduce yourself a little about your background and tell us how you got involved with that movement?
Oh, great. Yeah, it's I'll start almost from the beginning. I grew up in Southern California in the San Bernardino area, which is in the Inland Valley. And this area is a hub for warehouses. Not just Amazon warehouses, but Amazon does have an outsized presence there. And with warehouses comes trucks and vans and planes. A lot of logistics infrastructure. That means that the Inland Valley and Ontario, where my parents currently live, is one of the most polluted areas in the country and in the States. Growing up there, I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't really until I left and moved to a place like Seattle, where Amazon is headquartered, I started realizing the inequities that communities like San Bernardino face when a lot of those negative externalities of pollution are put on communities that are primarily people of color communities or low-income communities. So I worked at Amazon for 6 years in retail at AWS as well, and then finally in last mile delivery, because I wanted to see, can I do something within the company that would address these inequities? And I found that within the company to be a very difficult proposition because, to echo some of what Paul was saying, it's not a priority. Emissions impact, pollution's impact, societal impact, that's not something that Amazon really measures. And as you all likely know, Amazon prides itself on being a data-driven company. And if something isn't measured, then it's not going to be worked on. And so I had a series of frustrating moments, and that I know Paul also had experience while within the company trying to make some kind of real change happen. And ultimately realized that it wasn't going to happen via those internal channels. And so about a year and a half ago, started talking with other coworkers at Amazon in Seattle, and we started talking about, hey, like, we all really care about the climate crisis, and started doing research into Amazon's climate impact, and realized very quickly, after not that much research, because frankly, Amazon's not trying to hide it, right? To Brian's point, for a long time, Amazon, unlike other tech companies, didn't even attempt to really do much of greenwashing. It was just not even a topic that the company deigned to talk about. And so we were horrified as employees that our company was had this significant climate impact. It's not just the logistics infrastructure that I talked about that's polluting my hometown, but it's also the data centers from AWS. Now it's also Alexa, Kindle, a lot of Amazon branded products. It's grocery stores now, Go stores, retail, brick and mortar stores now that Amazon is also expanding into, and we really realized that we had to take this to the top of the company. A lot of us had tried internal ways of trying to move up our chain, and that just wasn't gaining traction. And so literally this time last year, our first action was to file a shareholder resolution asking Amazon's board for a plan on its climate impact. And that was shot down by the board, and we then rolled that into a public letter where now nearly 9,000 Amazon employees have signed their names calling on Jeff and the board to take responsibility. And that was the first time that tech workers had put their names collectively, publicly, calling on the company to take more action. And we continued organizing, and to make a long story short, culminated in a walkout in September, coinciding with the global climate strikes led by youth of the Fridays for Future movement. And we had over 3,000 Amazon employees walk out all over the world. And coincidentally, 24 hours before our walkout, Jeff announced the climate pledge. Total coincidence. And responded actually to a lot of our points about Brian's point about Amazon being middle of the pack. Jeff said that he no longer wanted to be middle of the pack and wanted to be a leader. That was language that we've been using for months at that point. And I can get into some of the holes in the climate pledge, and Brian himself has written a good article about the gaps in the climate pledge. But what we're seeing is there has been a turning point because of the employee organizing, and because more and more attention is being called out to Amazon's climate impact in the media, in a lot of community organizations, that Amazon is now starting to pay attention. And again, it goes back to Paul's point of a lot of all these issues that we're talking about here today, whether it's climate, that like we're talking about here right now, or taxes, or working conditions in the warehouses. Amazon is not going to make any changes of its own volition. It never has, and it never will. All the wins, all the concessions that Amazon has made has been in direct response to worker organizing, whether it's within the warehouse or tech workers, whether it's pressure from politicians, from community members, from lobbyists. The company is not set up in a way to think about these kinds of externalities, and so it's our job to all of us to be that point.
Yeah, and I just want to take a second to underline the fact of how sort of unprecedented and impressive this tech organizing really was, because there isn't a legacy of tech worker organizing. Tech employees do not tend to think about themselves think of themselves as workers. Solidarity is a strange and foreign concept, and I'd say there's two. It's been the Google walkout or forced arbitration, and it's been the Amazon climate movement that has really sort of jump-started this entire sort of movement in the US that is now really gaining steam. And you're seeing add-ons in Facebook and Microsoft, the biggest tech companies, that I think there's a case to be made that the only way that we're going to hold them accountable on some of these issues is from the inside. Because people have been complaining about, Amazon's laggard clean energy policies or its failures to release its carbon footprint for 10 years. Greenpeace has been releasing report after report after report. It's been a thorn in its side. There's been critical journalists, but Bezos has never seen fit to pull this trigger, to actually release its footprint, to come clean until the organizing came from the inside.
Well, just to add to that, I think that if you don't have the employee organising, what happens is that one person will go, they will try, and then they will bang their head against the wall, and they will keep banging their head against the wall until they leave. And then the next person will go and they will bang their head against the wall because they just don't know that the other people exist. And that's what the movement has changed, is that finding all these other people is what has happened. And while there's an awful lot of people in the room that are going, well, surely that was obvious, that within tech, that just isn't obvious. We just do not work in that way. We never have, because actually tech is a very well-paid profession. We just don't feel the need to get together and have any kind of collective discussions. We don't need to, we can look after ourselves. It's very much the way we look at it. And now we're looking at it from the point of view of, actually we have, a few of us are beginning to go, well, we think these companies are too big. They should have more of an impact on society. They should have more of they should be thinking about themselves in a different way. And I think those conversations haven't been happening, and they need to start happening.
Did you have something to add?
It has been really incredible to see tech organizing spread throughout a lot of these big companies. With the climate walkout, when we at Amazon announced that we were walking out, we weren't anticipating that other tech companies, other workers at other tech companies would do the same. We were focused on Amazon, but then of course we saw that people started getting inspired, and that resulted in comments and concessions from the Google CEO. But I do want to say obviously I think it's very important that tech workers from the inside organize. It's not happening in a vacuum, right? It's tech workers are seeing some of these things from their own work, but also because of the work that of organizations like Greenpeace. Yes, Greenpeace has been calling, and other organizations have been calling on Amazon to release its carbon footprint for over a decade. But I think that is really important. And actually, the media has a really important role in this. I will say your Brian's article in Gizmodo about breaking the news that big tech was actively aiding the fossil fuel industry and extracting fossil fuels. That was a critical moment for us employees. A lot of us didn't even know. We worked at this company and we didn't even know that our own company was doing this. And that article really agitated and pissed off a lot of us. And so I think while it is critical that we have tech workers organizing, it's also critical that we have an environment in which a lot of these questions are being asked in the public sphere. We're tech employees, yes, but we are also citizens here, and we're paying attention to what's going on in the world. And without these issues being raised from in public society from organizations like you all represent, these conversations can't even get started. So.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been really interesting to see. I understand that there's been some sort of, there's been some cross group organizing between tech and warehouse organizations. So there's a lot of really promising work being done. Of course, none of it, can succeed on its own. But I do see a lot of promising, fruits in sort of those collaborations and the movement thus far. I am curious to get a little more insight into sort of how internally the company kind of gauges these issues. Paul, at your time at AWS, can you talk a little bit about how people would sort of conceive of AWS's impact on the environment at all? I know you said that it's not something that was really there, but certainly it gets raised from time to time. These reports get published, calls get published. Is there a sense that this is something that they should be thinking about? Is it totally dismissed? Are there vulnerability points that can be, exploited?
So I was, part of my job was to go out and speak for Amazon, for AWS, so I was PR trained. So I got all of the, I got to know what I was supposed to say at various different times, which was quite exciting. So if you want to know how to get around all of this, I can tell you. But part of it is that you essentially, if someone comes back to you and says, your climate impact is terrible, you basically accentuate positives. It's essentially the role of going, we've got all of these wind farms and we've got all of this, and our current situation is 50% of this, and you simply accentuate the positives, and we've got a climate pledge, is now essentially what's going to be said for the foreseeable future. And so you end up with a situation where you just never accept the premise, and you go, we're doing all of this. You never accept the premise that we're bad as AWS. You just say we are a good organisation, and we are a good. And I think that's part of what tech as a whole does. Is it says. It never tries to say, in fact I don't think it would ever say it was good or bad. I think it would always say, well actually technology here is neutral. We're not going to make any kind of comment about whether we are right or wrong. We are going to allow our customers to say whether what they do, they can make their own decisions about whether something is right or wrong. And I think that culture pervades through most of technology. So, it's society's job to decide whether or not we're doing the right thing. And if they want to tell us we're doing the wrong thing, then they need to legislate and tell us. But if they don't legislate and tell us, then we can effectively do what we like. And I think that follows a lot through tech. I don't know if you would agree with that. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Andy Jassy, CEO of AWS, he has said on multiple occasions, when faced with criticism, whether it's about climate or whether facial recognition technology is used to surveil and deport immigrants, his line is, we're following the law. We're not breaking the law, and so we're not doing anything wrong. And that, I personally, I think that's a very low bar, but I think that also calls on all of us in this room to make sure that, Amazon is going to go by that minimum bar, and so how do we raise the bar from that angle? And I will on another point that you brought up is about this idea of efficiency, right? There's a lot. Not just Amazon, but a lot of tech companies, but we're talking about Amazon here. Talk about how AWS is making things more efficient, and therefore it is better for the climate. There's a little bit of a paradox there, right? It's kind of a false solution, a false comparison. Just because you're more efficient doesn't actually mean you're using less or actively trying to use less. Actually, I was in a meeting with some very high senior leaders of the company, and we brought up. I was there with some other employees who have been organizing, and we brought up the fact that AWS was working with oil and gas companies. We were talking about Amazon's climate impact. And we said, why does AWS have an entire marketing website, which is publicly available, touting how we are helping fossil fuel companies find new oil wells more quickly. In 8 seconds, we could model discovering a new oil field, whereas before, without AWS, it took a month. And the senior leader's response was, well, we're helping, don't we want to help oil companies become more efficient? It's more efficient to do this in the cloud than it is to do otherwise. And it's, I think what that response speaks to is just a fundamental, one, misunderstanding of what the climate crisis calls for, and two, almost willful blindness about what kind of impact that we're having, and falling back to the PR lines of, look at our great wind farms, look at how efficient we're being. And with the climate crisis, efficiency is very much a false solution.
Right. And that's really what it comes down to. In some energy markets now, it's cheaper to use wind power than coal or even natural gas. So Amazon can buy power from those sources without it denting the bottom line. So it's really telling that when you look at key inflection points, like somebody asked Bezos while he introduced his climate pledge, well, your employees are asking you to stop doing these contracts with oil and gas, helping them to accelerate extraction and exploration rates. And he said exactly what you just said. He said, well, no, there's a transition going on. We don't want to deprive them of any tools. These poor oil companies who need the tools, and it's, if you're doing well maintenance or something to prevent a leak, maybe there's some application there that could make sense in some way, but we're explicitly talking about increasing the extraction rates, increasing the amount of oil that can be explored for and located or extracted from wells. So it is almost this Orwellian sort of denial of what's actually going on. So as long as there's a profit stream, it seems like Amazon is going to hold on to it with a death grip. And one last thing that I wanted to ask you both before we open up for questions is, I know, Paul, you told me a little bit that you raised some of these issues internally, and Eliza, you've raised a lot of them. So if we could hear a little bit about what that process was like for anyone who's considering doing the same at a tech company or wants to know more about that process. Like, what sort of obstacles did you face? What was the reaction?
It's really hard to raise them internally. Certainly, as an individual within a tech company, you basically have to figure out who the right person to talk to is. It's usually going to have some term like sustainability, and usually that person has responsibility for, I don't know, buying certain types of cups. And I mean that in the best possible way, but they generally don't have the kind of responsibility that they need. And we are in a climate crisis, we do have a massive set of problems, and we don't have the person you need to talk to, which is the CEO, the person at the top of the company, where you need to go, we need a systemic change in this company. And I think that's kind of the problem, which is that we are limited in the person that we can reach. And I think when I tried, it was hugely problematic trying to find the right person, literally trying to get a one-to-one meeting with the head of sustainability or a video chat wherever they were based. And I just was banging my head against a brick wall, and I eventually left, and you had more success, so I will hand over.
I definitely had some of those experiences as well, where it was head banging against the wall. I'll share one story in particular. So I was meeting with some folks about really it was around how do we think about innovative ideas around reducing carbon impact. And a lot of the discussion was, frankly, about passing the buck to customers, right? Saying, people were saying, well, if we just show customers the impact of them choosing one-day shipping, right, or 2-day shipping over longer delivery times, then that'll be obvious. And side note, I think this is also a pitfall of the climate movement, of people focusing on individual choices when the problem is just so much bigger than that. So really want us all to reject that choice. So in this meeting, people were saying, oh, what if we just show customers the carbon impact of their shipping options? And immediately that idea was just shot down, because what people were saying is, look, the retail team, the retail org will never agree to that, because as a fundamental tenet of the retail org, they want to limit the number of steps between a customer thinking that they want to buy something and them actually buying something. So that buy button, right there. They don't want the customer to think about that any more than is absolutely necessary. And so I'm presenting this. I'm not saying that was the best idea to do, but what I am saying is that what you see here is a fundamental tenet of the company, that ultimately what matters is profit and revenue, and right. So it's not about climate impact and emissions impact. And so what you see with what you see with the kinds of changes that Amazon is now saying as a result of us pressuring Amazon are still kind of superficial and more shallow changes. We're not proposing any fundamental transformational changes to the way the company does its work, and that's why we need to continue pushing.
Just to add a little bit, I think what I just said was customer obsession. If you've never looked at Amazon's leadership principles, I suggest you just Google it and find it now, and just read them, because you are, on your first day as an Amazon employee, you are shown the leadership principles and you are expected to follow them each and every single day. It is basically a mantra for how you are supposed to work at the company, every single person. And if you, as the point was, if you try and do anything to get in the way of being customer obsessed, which is the top one, it's not the top one, it's just one of them, but if you get in the way, that's the one everyone knows. If you get in the way, if you put anything in the way of being customer obsessed, then you basically are shut down. And so that's essentially what happened. If you basically go, well, if we put in the carbon impact of choosing one or the other, then we're getting in the way of being customer obsessed, but we don't know they're interested in their carbon impact. So we're not going to do it.
Do either of you have anything specific that you wanted to bring up to add before we turn over to questions?
I do want to bring up that the employees, the group is called Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, and that was a deliberate choice to call ourselves Employees for Climate Justice, not just climate action or climate change. Because what we're seeing, as I mentioned, Amazon's logistics infrastructure is racist. It is putting its pollution, concentrating its pollution in communities of color. And while you can argue that maybe Amazon didn't intend to do that, but intentions don't matter. The reality is that it is happening, and that Amazon is participating, perpetuating, and exacerbating racial inequalities by its siting practices. And it's not just in warehouses, right? We see this with data centers globally as well. You might notice that Amazon has data centers and massive data center farms. So these are literally, server farms all over the world. And particularly, lots of data centers in India and China, and some of the most polluted countries in the world. And you'll also notice that Amazon's renewable, solar farms and wind farms, none of them are located in India or China. All of them are located in the U.S. and just this year they announced that they're opening some in Ireland and Sweden. So that's climate racism. And that is a system that Amazon is actively participating in. And so if we only talk about climate change and climate justice, we only talk about climate change and climate action, and when Amazon talks about we're going to reduce emissions, we're going to have net zero emissions. Net zero means it's going to continue polluting in certain communities and just get those offsets from other communities. And so I think it's important that when we talk about Amazon's climate impact, we talk about climate justice, not just climate change.
And yeah, I would echo that. I think the simplest stats I would want to kind of point out is that if you look at data centers worldwide, it's pretty much the same as the climate impact of aviation. So we're not talking about just a kind of, it's just a few computers somewhere using a bit of electricity. We're talking about an industry that has an enormous impact on whether we get to 1.5 or 2 or 3 or 4 degrees. It has a problem, and tech has a problem, and most people in tech are actually unaware. Most people in tech don't think there's a problem, and I think this is an industry-wide issue, and I've spent most of the last year trying to make people aware, and it's incredibly difficult. But I think, and just as a quick example, Amazon, I think it's Amazon or it's Microsoft at the middle, one of them is planning to build a data center in Ireland that is looking to take 4% of the electricity of the whole of Ireland. That's the size of a data center when you're talking about electricity. This is not kind of a warehouse with a few computers in it. It's an enormous amount of computing power. And I know we've talked a lot about AWS and computing power, but the reason is that when you talk about climate, you can't really escape the conversation with Amazon and AWS. It's the growth part of where we're going.
Great. Okay, does anyone have any questions here?
Yes, hello. My name is Mirko Herberg. I represent the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, German Political Foundation. My question is, and you've given a few leads, but I would like to explore a little bit deeper how you connect your issues to the issues of the labor panel we had before. Do you see with your tech workers that language, those issues of the workers from the warehouses, you can connect that and mobilize on that as well? Or is it just sort of that activism around the climate and energy issue that drives and the organizing of workers?
Great actual question right out the gate. I love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So while Amazon Employees for Climate Justice is in our name, right, we organize around climate, but I think what we see is that the same mentality, right, the same mentality that we've talked about of putting profit over all else, of doing, only what is meeting what is legally we're bound to do. That same mentality is making the choices, whether it's choices about the climate crisis and what Amazon does, or whether it's about how Amazon treats its workers. So we see that this same system, the system of extraction, the system of profit maximizing profit. That's the same. We're both fighting the same thing. Warehouse workers, tech workers. We're both looking at that same system and seeing what the consequences are. And so we're starting to, I hope, find solidarity in that. But I would say that we recognize it's the same fight.
In the back.
It was just sort of, to that note, we really appreciate the solidarity that we received from the tech workers in Seattle back in June when they sent a pilot from Seattle and tech workers to stand with Amazon warehouse workers. We know at the warehouse workers, we have less leverage than tech workers. So we appreciate that kind of a cross-sector solidarity, and that's the future of organizing. And I think it's time to invest heavily in the field in organizing. Organizing makes things happen. And I think there's some very promising future in that kind of a cross-sector solidarity. And again, I want to give shout out to your team. You guys are amazing.
Thank you. We think you guys are amazing too. Really inspired a lot of tech workers for sure.
Anyone else? Anyone else?
Thank you. My name is Francesco. I'm a scholar at Sciences Po Paris. I would like to thank you for coming here and share your experience here with us. But I would like to make explicit a sort of implicit dilemma that maybe we can read through your discourse, which is, yes, on the one hand, Amazon is a massive polluting industry. On the other hand, they built a massive, very powerful infrastructure, and centralized infrastructure. So the question is, maybe we as a collectivity, as a public, seize this infrastructure, the technology it contains, in order to make it work in another way, the way we wish. I think this is the key political point. Can we appropriate this infrastructure or not? Because according to what you said, Elisa, you said the company doesn't have functionally works in a way that they don't take into account some issues. So that basically they are a capitalist corporation. So we could not pretend. Does it work? Okay. Maybe the key point is not to ask Amazon to behave, let's say, hypocritically as like Google and Facebook and tell that they are sensitive to this kind of issue. But maybe we can push forward the discourse and ask ourselves, is it possible to convert this technology and this infrastructure for the common good, let's say?
Shall I take that one?
Go for it, yeah. Nationalize Amazon?
Brilliant. It's a fantastic question, and it's a conversation that happens across tech quite often, actually, and very regularly. The problem is that Amazon is incredibly powerful because it's incredibly data-driven. So if a lot of people use Amazon, Amazon gets an awful lot of information about the next kind of services that it needs to build. Now, one of the jobs that I had was actually a product role, and within that product role, I saw the information that was coming through, and I saw the amount of data, and I saw what we within Amazon. I use we all the time. It's unfortunate. I'm not there anymore. And I think what isn't understood from the outside is the amount and the type of innovation and the speed of innovation that goes on. So what basically happens is that a service will come out that you didn't even think that you needed. And it just gets created. And so you will see things that come out, and you're like, why are they building that? And they're building it because they've seen the trends and the data patterns from previous things. So if you start to nationalize that kind of a system, you've got to nationalize the innovation system at the same time, which is incredibly difficult. And so you've either got to say, right, we've got to teach everyone to be entrepreneurs and teach them to be innovative in terms of the data, which is virtually impossible, or you've got to say, you've got to allow companies to be innovative, you've got to allow them to have that space and the breadth to be creative in that way, but give them guardrails, give them limits. And I think that's where I would put the conversation, is what are the limits? And the conversation ends up being Amazon doesn't have limits. And that's where I think the problem lies. That's personal opinion, you can all disagree with me, but that's where I think.
I also want to emphasize real quick that when we were saying that Google and Facebook were at least outwardly having these goals, it's not like they were these standard-bearing, great companies with a moral comment. They're doing this. Google, especially, is doing the exact same things Amazon is doing on every regard. So it's just Amazon didn't even bother to release a press release, saying we care. So.
I'll just add. Yes, Amazon, like as you said, right? Amazon is operating as a capitalist, right? This is the system that we live in, but we're all part of this system, right? We're the workers, we're the community members, we're the policy makers, the policy writers, the lobbyists, the journalists. We all have a part to play, and so I guess I would I would ask that question back, right? If whatever the solution might be, right? Whether it's in your view, nationalizing Amazon or something else, I would ask, how do we use the levers that we have to build enough power to be able to make an ask like that, to be able to make something big and transform who are, everybody in this room has a constituency, has an audience. What are we asking ourselves and our audiences of what we're willing to do and what kind of changes we're willing to fight for?
Are we at a good place to wrap up here? Okay. Okay, well, I just want to say before we conclude that thank you both for stepping forward. It's not easy to do this. It's hard. I mean, tech is kind of an insular world. If you're looking for other jobs, it becomes a lot harder if you're someone who speaks out on these issues. And I also very much like the point you made about the neutrality of tech platforms. I think this mantra that technology is neutral or platforms are neutral will eventually come to be seen as one of the great enablers of crisis down the line. And it's up to the workers, it's up to employees, it's up to the public to actually construct a technology system that is just and can function in a way that we might want to see it function. So thank you both for sharing your insights. Thank you both for everything you've done towards this issue. Yeah.